Alright, I caved in. You guys wanted my perspective on melee DPS, just like the caster video, so here I am giving it to you. Today we're not going to look at some random tier list or old Warcraft logs. Instead, we're going to use the thoughts and opinions of me and my friends who actually finished rank 1 last TBC. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this, and click the join button if you want more specifics. In TBC, melee lives and dies by 3 things: threat thresholds, white damage, and crit modifiers. Unlike ranged, melee crits do 200% baseline damage, most damage comes from your auto attacks, and the threat is a tighter threshold at 110% instead of 130. Those 3 things are going to be important no matter what you're playing. But I'll go ahead and dive into it, starting off with Feral. Feral is the most unique melee DPS in many different ways. Your spot in the raid is secured by providing leader of the pack to the second melee group. You still engage in power shifting, but your weapons are so good that you no longer have to farm crowd pummelers like in vanilla. You are considered support, but you do very relevant damage. This is mostly due to 2 things. 1, Shred being generally an amazing ability and your ability to spam it, and 2, a little mentioned talent called Predatory Instincts. This gives you a 10% crit mod on literally everything, including your auto attacks, and even bears can get this, which is part of the reason why they're the go-to tanks. Even though auto attacks in cat form always start off at 1 second and you have a crit mod on them, they contribute much less to your total damage output than other classes. Ferals have a pretty solid talent tree with lots of stats and powerful core talents. You make rogues jealous by having Seal Fate all the time with Primal Fury, but your spenders are so mediocre it's not very relevant. Because shredding is so powerful, you will want to be behind the boss at absolutely all times and have a bear mangle for you. You also want to be power shifting well with lots of mana consumes. Not having access to mail or plate gear forces you to compete with melee for other core leather pieces while also being low gear prio. The number one thing that's really holding your damage back is not being able to multiply it with any cooldowns. Feral isn't really a weak spec, it's just the only melee where skill, uptime, and effort actually matter every second, while you also have to off-tank sometimes. Next hybrid is Enhance. Enhancement Shamans provide enhanced Wind Fury and Strength of Earth totems to their melee groups, as well as Grace of Air when totem twisting. This is generally the only melee in the game not defaulted to 1 spot per raid, and instead you can run 2 or more. You also provide the group buff Unleashed Rage, which provides 10% more melee AP. Enhancement Shamans do very competitive and consistent damage, and I'll go ahead and explain why. While you don't have any crit modifiers, you do get 9% hit for free from your talent trees. This is very useful because of your importance on focusing on and playing into your hit table. Wind Fury makes up the most amount of your damage contribution besides your plain auto attacks. It's very frequently forgotten that Shamans don't just have the effect from their Wind Fury totem, they also put on their own Wind Fury enhancement on both weapons, which is a lot better. It provides not just 1 bonus attack, but 2, with 475 increased attack power. You do not have access to a dual wield specialization talent, making your offhand attacks fully penalized by the 50% reduction, unlike the other 2 dual wielders. While you might have some mana problems early, Shamanistic Rage and Judgment of Wisdom cause you to be the least mana-starved melee that has it as a resource. And you also get to enjoy the Shamanistic Focus noise spamming you the entire expansion when your auto attacks crit. You want to use slow weapons as a Shaman, but more importantly, you want the same speed weapons, usually the same weapon twice. The Shaman's Flurry talent can't consume 2 charges at once, and so attacking twice at the same time doubles its benefit. A lot of people make a huge deal out of this and make it seem like this really hard, critical thing to do. It really isn't. If you just right-click on the boss before you move into melee range, your auto attacks will already be synced and stay synced the entire fight unless you mess it up. What is actually an annoying mechanic, though, is snapshotting your Fire Elemental totem with a spell power set on before the fight, which most people won't bother with doing, but it's a pretty big damage increase. The enhancement rotation is fairly static, involving cycling through multiple 10-ish second cooldowns with the timings of various abilities. It's a pretty typical priority listy rotation like Wrathret Paladin or Windwalker Monk. Focusing on your white damage is the most important and sadly the most overlooked thing that the average Enhanced Shaman can do. You have talents like Weapon Mastery's 10% and Elemental Weapons 40% bonus damage on Wind Fury procs. These apply to the total damage of the entire swing, not just the base damage. With great uptime and solid RNG, you can make up for your lack of cooldowns, and Enhance can really compete on the damage meters much easier than the other 2 hybrids. You're not really enhancing the raid as much as you're enhancing your auto attacks, and if they aren't carrying you, then you're playing Enhance wrong. Moving on to the Retribution Paladin. Ret Paladins are a support melee. One is generally brought to the raid to provide a 3rd Paladin Blessing, a 3rd Paladin Judgment, and refresh judgments with Crusader Strike. Pretty much always optimal to bring 3 total Paladins, so if you don't have a Holy Prally, you can bring another Ret. Your rotation is heavily dependent and focused on your swing timer and a slow weapon speed to Seal Twist. Some seals stick around for half a second when a new seal is applied, and auto-attacking during that time will hit with both of them. While Seal's command's damage is holy, it is still subject to dodge, parries, and misses. This makes the expertise stat and getting the normal 2-handed hit cap extremely critical to the class, and you'll see many pre-raid rets running around with the Shatrath leggings from the Arcatraz key quest. You do have some great flat stats from your talents, as well as some great scaling, but no crit modifier at all, just like Enhance. Instead of a flurry effect, you get Vengeance, which provides stacking flat damage and glowing hands. Rets are generally expected to have blacksmithing to gain access to critical two-handed weapons. You want a slow two-handed weapon, not just to give you more time in between swings for another GCD, but also to increase the chance of Seal of Command proccing from its normalized 7 ppm proc chance. If you can only get 7 procs per minute, the lower the number of attacks, the higher the chance of it happening on each attack, and the harder that those attacks are going to hit. Harder hitting attacks also scales up the damage of Seal of Command, which is 70% of the attack. This also syncs up well with Wind Fury's 20 ppm and its 3-second internal cooldown timer. This is why people consider it a slot machine RNG heavy spec despite the high skill cap. Getting lucky means 3 attacks all at once, your normal hit, Wind Fury proc, and Seal of Command, as well as all of those attacks applying Seal of Blood's bonus damage. Even with Fanaticism's 30% threat reduction, these extreme damage spikes can easily cause you to rip aggro and die. Unlike other hybrids, you do not lack a cooldown. However, Avenging Wrath will give you Forbearance, preventing you from bubbling if you rip aggro, and using a haste pot prevents you from reactively lipping. Everything about this spec amplifies variance, the swing timers, the movement, the procs, and the threat, which is why the skill ceiling is so high and the consistency is so low. The thing that is holding Ret back is just very simply your luck. In top parsing Ret videos, like I'm showing here, you can clearly see that they're capable of competitive damage. When Ret pops off, it's insane, and whenever it doesn't, it still requires maximum effort. Alright, now that we're done with the hybrids, I'll do Rogue next. As a Rogue, you are brought to the raid primarily to provide improved expose armor debuff to the boss. On some fights, due to the melee unfriendliness TBC mechanics, Sunders may be more practical. Rogues, along with other melee, did very competitive damage last time, especially during Phase 2, where we expected casters to beat them. And there's tons of like random tier lists and Warcraft log deep dives from people that I guess they didn't play last time, because all of those logs are highly inflated with 25% increased attack speed from battle chickens, which we're not going to have this time around. This hurts Warrior, Rogue, and Enhance the most in that order, and it was a very noticeable difference. I only have this footage because I just happened to hit record because I was actually able to get 5 squawks on this Margrim here, and that makes it a rare situation where I was actually top DPS. So with no chickens and less lockouts to get Warglaives and being second prio on them, and having an extremely competitive raid spot, Rogue is kind of in a rough spot. Rogue has access to some ridiculously overpowered talents. For example, the Rogue dual wield spec provides a full 50% damage increase to your offhand. That causes it to do full damage as if it was a main hand weapon, as well as weapon expertise, which applies to all weapon types, but you'll mostly be using swords. You must be combat in order to get these, and the other 2 specs just don't compete with it at all. Assassination in PvE must mutilate from behind with 2 daggers, and unlike in Wrath of the Lich King, rogue poisons do not scale with attack power in TBC. That basically just kills the spec right there. And Subtlety does not have the Honor Among Thieves talent yet in this expansion, and that pretty much carried its PvE potential the last 20 years, so don't play it in raids. On top of that, you must play combat in order to access your core cooldowns, which are extremely important in this expansion to stack up with Bloodlust and other ICDs. If you do get a raid spot as a rogue, it's very fun. The ability to outplay boss mechanics is extremely rewarding. For example, Prince Malchezaar in Karazhan, you never have to move away from the Shadow Nova because you can vanish at the end of the cast, you can Cloak of Shadows it, and if you do have to move away, you can sprint out and then back in. If you've seen my Wrath of the Lich King combat rotation video, TBC is slightly similar with a lot of exceptions. Most importantly, you're missing the glyph of expose armor and the flat melee haste from improved Icy Talons. You will not be able to maintain full uptime on Slice and Dice, Expose, and Rupture, so just consider Rupture a bonus. Unlike a crit-dependent flurry effect, Slice and Dice gives you full control over your attack speed steroid. And you have a crit mod with lethality, which provides 30% to your abilities. I generally default to rounding up to 5 combo point finishers or rounding down to 1 combo point finishers. This is so you're always getting maximum value from either Ruthlessness or Relentless Strikes. Ideally, you always get 5-point Relentless Strikes value, but that's not always practical. Because you can put on Warglaives, you have the second highest melee damage output potential next to Fury Warriors, and that makes you pretty high gear priority. Because you're a pure damage class that can't tank or heal, people generally don't consider you a support class no matter how much damage you're dealing. I like to think there are 2 types of rogues, ones that get all of the gear that they don't deserve, and ones that get none of the gear that they do deserve. If you don't know which one you are, it's probably not the first one. At the end of the day, rogues aren't bad at all, they're just very socially expensive. Alright, and the last one, we got Warriors. I'll do Arms first. Arms has 2 playstyles, Slam and Kebab. Arms Warriors are provided a raid spot due to providing the debuff Blood Frenzy, and because we just came out of Vanilla WoW, that raid spot is considered extremely difficult to secure. Even without Blood Frenzy, having a warrior for each melee group for Battle Shout is essential. Slam is the much more difficult playstyle, but most of the time it can see slightly higher damage output when fully optimized and no Warglaives. Your rotation is basically just rage dumping as well as casting Improved Slam for half a second immediately following a weapon swing. Unlike Steady Shot, you are not slam weaving between your auto attacks, the slam resets your auto in its entirety. The reason for the precise timing is to reduce the potential loss from causing your auto attack to start again at a different time. So you're making the downside, restarting your auto attack, happen when it was going to happen anyway, right when your attack started. Slam resets both of your auto attacks if you're dual wielding, so using a two-hander is the only viable option. All warriors are generally expected to get blacksmithing. Slam competes with Rets for two-handers and raids and uses the same blacksmithing weapons. Kebab and Fury use Dragon Maw instead. Kebab is a significantly easier to execute playstyle, simply getting dual wield spec instead of improved Slam. You dual wield and play very similarly to a Fury warrior that just does less damage. Practically, this will be the better option for most players and is always the best option with Warglaives. But it's mostly unpopular unless if the warrior has a specific reason to consider it, usually regarding weapon acquisition. Slam is easy in theory, but in practice, just like a Ret Paladin and melee weaving hunters, many players hurt themselves trying to super optimize their rotation. Things like having to be behind the boss to shred or not being able to slam while moving sound like no big deal, but in practice, they can easily overload your mental stack and cost you a few seconds of uptime. If melee fundamentals are your weak point, Arms is going to expose that right away. Okay, this video is getting long, but now for the Fury Warrior. Many people consider this the top tier melee super carry DPS of the raid, but like I said earlier, regardless of your damage, providing Battle Shout to the second melee group will always make your spot worth it. The Warrior's dual wield spec only provides 25% increased offhand damage, which makes it the middle ground between Enhance and Rogue. The Warrior talent trees are pretty abnormal compared to other classes, mostly avoiding flat stats or extreme scaling, but there is some in there for sure. The talents have many rows with 5 out of 5 slots to focus all of your points into instead of spreading them around. Any Warrior DPS will want to grab Impale, a 20% crit mod on your abilities. However, since you can turn your auto attacks into abilities with Heroic Strike, this is the most powerful melee crit modifier in the game, and it comes with Deep Wounds as an added bonus. Your rotation as Fury or Kebab is mostly just cleaving whenever you can, using your talented ability and Whirlwind on cooldown, and then rage dumping when needed. Whirlwind hits with both weapons in TBC baseline, which drastically increases its strength. Another benefit of converting your whites to yellows is your white hit table can be much lower priority, and you do not need to overcap hit like other dual wielders would. You can see this effect in your gem priority by using crit gems instead of hit gems. Because Heroic Strike comes with added bonus threat in the ability, you're much more likely to rip aggro than any other melee, especially when your damage is heavily being amplified by Warrior's insane cooldowns. For all warrior types, timing your cooldowns optimally is the most easily accessible area for skill expression. Last TBC, you could easily just save one of your Bloodlust for execute phase. This time, since everybody only gets one, that's not going to be possible unless if you leave the raid while the lust goes out and then rejoin it. This was very common for Affliction Warlocks to do back in Wrath of Lich King for the same reason, so that way they can lust during execute. But this strategy probably won't be optimal entirely because of Battle Shout. When you leave the raid, you remove your Battle Shout from everybody else, and you lose all buffs, so you'll have to be rebuffed. This is mostly bad because of Battle Shout snapshotting. You can put on the Solarian Trinket and the Warrior Tier 2 bonus to get a better Battle Shout before the fight and then switch the gear back off before you pull. Doing this provides a pretty worthwhile damage bonus to your entire group. And so whenever you leave the raid and you get rid of that snapshotted Battle Shout, it's just not really worth it. Unfortunately, all of this just means you probably won't ever have lust during execute phase now, which is a pretty big deal. Most people think the hard part of Fury is mashing all the buttons, but the APM requirement is actually pretty low. Fury isn't hard mechanically, it's hard because nobody plans out cooldowns and cleave windows properly. And that same thing kind of applies to Rogue. Well, if you actually understand melee now, good. If you don't, go ahead and rewatch the video or check out the memberships if you want specifics. Thanks for watching the whole video and have fun in TBC, guys.